Okay, welcome to the second episode of Art is Trauma. This time we are reading Pynchon's The Crying of Lot 49, which was a deeply traumatizing experience for both of us. Um,
I,
so,
I didn't know something could be so traumatizing and so funny at the same time.
uh, well, um, actually,
But that is actually a good first in. What was this?
yeah, I'm actually I'm gonna want you to do some explaining for me, Chris, because I didn't get into this novel as much as it didn't engage me, I have to say, ultimately. I thought it was really interesting, and I'm glad I read it. And it basically, but I need you to explain what you find so deeply appealing about this work.
Yeah.
And normally we do like a summary of this book, but I don't believe a summary is possible. So we'll just forfeit that.
Yeah,
Um,
I think you really like if anyone's listening, you have to just go read this book. It's only 150 pages and then come back and join the confusion.
Yeah, it's I mean in a very short way, it's, a young woman, not a young woman, a woman. She turns out she has to be the executor of some fabulously wealthy person's estate.
Yep.
She goes off and tries to do that and gets enmeshed into bizarre and sprawling conspiracies, are as surreptitious as they are bizarre. Um, so
Yeah.
so let's
And you're not sure if I mean the book is meta. It's always telling you you know what you're reading. I mean, when Oedipa Moss at the very end is like, "Oh, I don't know," she lays out all the options. Those are also the options that we have as readers to decide from. She goes, either I'm crazy, there's a people are concerned about me, or there's this big conspiracy. And I think that those are our options as well, maybe to choose from.
Yeah, my okay. So let's start with that part of it.
Okay.
I For me, I can think of other books where there's a certain ambiguity, there's unreliable narration. That's what this is an example of. Like Lolita, you're reading, the tale of Humbert Humbert from Humbert Humbert's perspective. And he's probably stretching things to some degree. Like it's not entirely faithful. The same thing with Beckett novels of you really these people are just shambling intellectually, and they basically tell you that they're lying or misremembering things at various points.
Right.
And I'm okay with that because I like the narrator. Like I like the character of the narrator and his deeply biased perspective on things. I like living through his eyes. Um, so uh, but here we don't I don't have that same I don't believe in the narrator in this book in the same way. I don't care about Oedipa Ma. Do you find her to be an appealing character?
Yeah, I think she's a great character.
Well, like, well,
She's like
just
a classic character for me.
describe what makes her interesting to you.
So I like the fact that she's completely caught in the truth. There's these people who are either okay, what am I like about her? I don't think she's first of all very likable. I just think she's classic. I
Well,
mean,
what makes her interesting? Like, you don't have to like Humbert Humbert, but you're
right.
fascinated by him.
Um, I think she so sums up a sort of quintessential paranoid subject. I mean the paranoia is so interesting that she's able to engage with. And I think it's the first time in a book where the paranoia of what is real enters into the level of literally what is real. It's the mark of postmodern literature for me, where it's so what I like about her is that she's an everyman in a certain way to me, but it's a symptom. She also has these symptoms, the drinking and stuff, of being caught in a world that's completely zany. And so I think all being said, what I like about her is shockingly the calm rationality in which she somehow manages to stay even while she's losing her mind.
Well, I mean, there's she doesn't strike me as a paragon of reasonableness. She just seems like, yeah, I mean, yeah, if you were in that situation, I guess you try to make sense of it that way. And she doesn't really have any values, anything that really means much to her. I mean, it's sort of her husband, but her husband is his own kind, is a weird kind of creature.
Yeah, I just think she so captures the parent. I get what I like about her is simple. She just captures the essence of paranoia. She just is that for me. Like it's the most distilled, pure paranoid subject I've ever read.
Well, I can understand that in the sense of the world in which they're enmeshed. Like the setting is the main character of the story.
Yeah.
Like just the and again, it's it's always surprising of like, okay, like so we're starting off like dealing with this real estate owner stuff, and then it turns out, oh, but there's some weird business about GI's bones, and oh yeah, that reminds me of this weird Jacobean play, and then we
Yeah.
have. And then
Yeah.
that goes on forever, which is fun. I laughed at that a number of times. Just like all of like that intense description of everything.
Well, I think that might be the high point of his. So quality wise, can
Yeah,
I okay, so I have a different opinion now reading. So I read this first in undergrad and I thought it was revelatory. I found it taboo to break reality in that way. So I found that sort of like edgy, just to be simplistic.
yeah. Mhm.
That's not my reading at all now as a older person who's read much more experimental literature than this. My my favorite things were two parts. The joke. So anytime there is a sense of humor, I think it's usually pretty good. And the almost like naturalistic descriptions of things. I thought the descriptions were very well done, very well written. Now what I don't care for, and it's such a stupid thing, but where I was taken out of the experience is when I occasionally just went, that's just silly. There are occasional moments where I just was like, that's silly. I can't, I can't do that. Oh, you froze.
Hope it's working now. Oh, it's not working. This is so tragic. I'm dumb. Maybe I should.
I can hear you,
I
but I
don't know
can't
what
see
to
you.
do. Okay,
Can you
okay.
hear
I
me?
think I'm back. Can you hear me?
I can hear you
I can
fine.
hear you.
Okay, good. And the only thing is I
Okay,
can't see.
things are coming back. Okay, I can't see you either.
Okay, there we go.
Okay. All right. So, okay, you're saying
Oh,
the
so what I enjoyed was the descriptive language and a lot of the jokes. And I guess one other thing I enjoyed was I actually thought the conspiracy of history was well done, the way it threaded in. And if you looked it up, there's actual events. Some of them correspond and some didn't. And it was like funny where you're like, oh, that's kind of a weird game. What I didn't like was I just found I mean it's such a simple thing, but I didn't like the names.
uh, well, the thing is about the
I didn't like
name.
the silliness that brought me out of the experience. I know he's doing it purposefully. I didn't like it.
Yeah, the names have no point besides they're funny, like Mark Fallopian, Oedipa Mucho Mas. Uh, the best one is Genghis Cohen,
And
which
they're great, but they're also stupid. Like they're just plain that's they're purposely stupid, but at a certain level I'm like stop. Like by page 100 I was like stop, please stop.
yeah, it's like calling someone Genghis Cohen. It's like that character that has nothing to do with him. It has no symbology. It just is like, okay, that's yeah, Jewish Mongol, like that's the image, and I don't see the point here.
And I think that like I think what he's trying to do, and I think he does this better in the next novel, Gravity's Rainbow. I think he's trying to make the names part of the conspiracy of signification. Like you look and you try and find what the significance is. But at a certain point, I didn't. I just found they were silly and I moved on and I didn't like them.
Yeah, getting more direct to the humor. I laughed a couple of times, and when I didn't laugh, I usually at least gave like it was like, okay, that's a fine joke. I'm on board. I think the funniest thing in the entire book for me was when it's in the play when it's describing, and they snuck out the young prince in the disguise of an old procuress. It's like that's just yes. An elderly procuress. That was I approve of that joke. It's a good joke. Because it's so serious but absurd. But I mean, for me, a contrast when it comes to the humor is I think I haven't read all of it, but I've read a big chunk of Catch 22, and I find that book to be hysterical. And it has that same kind of like bizarre world. It is absurd. It's making fun of just how strange this situation, this bureaucracy they're
Yeah.
um, caught in. But the thing is the jokes always have a point for me. Like
Yeah.
it's always making the point of, yeah, you see how screwed up the system we are in. You look how screwed up reality is. Look how screwed up those people are. Like you always feel like, yes, I'm laughing because I know a person who's a real upright young man who looks like he's in Technicolor. You know,
I mean, I I think that when I first read this book, I would have gone to bat for the balancing act of absurdity that I thought this book was doing. Now, I'd actually just agree. I think it was okay. I I still have a soft spot for a lot of the jokes, but I do think there is a degree of just personal liking it. So here's one joke that I personally liked, but I could understand I'm not sure if it's good. So here it is. So it is more of a situational humor thing. You one of those right-wing nut outfits? Inquired the diplomatic Metzger. Fallopian twinkled. They accuse us of being paranoids. They? Inquired Metzger, twinkling also. Us? Asked Oedipa. And like,
that. No, I think that's pretty good.
that's pretty good. Okay, but I think my problem, to be really specific about this novel, um, why it didn't hit me so hard is because I think I found it a little cheap.
That was actually the exact word I was a little afraid to use. And it's
Well,
like,
I'm hurting my own feelings. When I first read the book, I was like, there is literally nothing better in the world. And now I'm like, well, it's just because someone can get away with doing things on a page doesn't mean it's always of high quality. or
Yeah,
or there's not, it's a lot. It's not, it's cheap because I think it's trying to tell us that it's not deep, but in doing so, it winds up not being deep in a certain sense.
yeah. Let's see. Actually, one comment about that joke of it did remind me exactly of something that happened with Glenn Beck, where he's the famous blackboard conspiracy theory. He literally had that
Yeah.
on the show. And he was at one time, someone was commenting like in the Obama administration or something that, I mean, this guy's a conspiracy theory or something. And he was responding like, it seems as if there's a concerted effort to smear me as a conspiracy theorist.
Ah!
There's a conspiracy that I'm a conspiracy theorist. Uh,
Oh yeah, that's great.
I think Ben Bear pointed that out, but but anyway, like that's right. But rolling. So when I hear that Mark Fallopian saying that, it's like, yep, yep, that's Beck.
And
Um,
I think I think like that would be the message of the novel in a certain sense. The deepest it gets is that like the paranoia that she feels is reflected back onto her. Like her therapist, Dr. Hilarious. I mean, I can't get I hate the name Dr. Hilarious, who's like in a cartoonish Nazi conspiracy to like, I mean, that was, I rolled my eyes because I kind of loved it, but I also was like, stop, just let me get on with my life. But like her paranoia, I found interesting that her paranoia is constantly being reflected back onto her. Dr. Hilarious is actually also paranoid. Mucho Mas is completely lost to LSD, giving, by the way, a fantastic description of what song is like if you're completely schizophrenic. That was actually a part I really loved, where he was like, the universal wavelength or something. I was like, oh shit, that's pretty good. Um, so I thought those were two structural points that I liked. I liked those two points of reflectivity of the
yeah.
paranoia.
Just as clarification on earlier point, it's like we were sort of saying this, but the reason why I like the humor in Catch 22 is it has a punch. It always
Yeah.
means something about life. The humor here, I don't know how it connects to human existence. It's like, oh yeah, that's absurd. That's out there. Whatever.
Oh,
Um,
I think it connects in the experience of paranoia. So like for example, the idea. So on a podcast, I was watching a guy who had a traumatic brain injury, and he became paranoid with hallucinations after the brain injury. And one of the things that helped him in therapy is realizing that he wasn't important. And like that's so fundamental to paranoia is the idea that you can't, because you're seeing something in reality that is not there. I mean, obviously, that's the whole point of a hallucination. In Oedipus Moss, the rational side of her knows that even if this is a conspiracy going back, it's not even that deep of a. I mean, it's fine. It's not the Illuminati. It's basically the Illuminati, right? Exchange post office for Illuminati, but it's somehow being invested with all this significance. And I just think that captures the clinical experience of paranoia, from my knowledge, like spot on. And that's the real is the experience of paranoia.
yeah, let's see. On this whole paranoia theme, I
Mm-hmm.
just have to contrast it with Kafka, where it's just like, the way he portrays being lost in a great, unfathomable machine. Like, that's the way he does it, that's just high art. That's just perfection.
Yeah, but I don't think it's actually about what it's like to in reality have paranoia, because he's an everyman. He's going through life. Oh, I have to go this way. Oh, I have to go that way. There's no internal voice splitting off like there is in this.
Well, so you're saying it's an internal paranoia,
Yeah,
or
I don't think Kafka does that type of paranoia.
yeah, I mean,
The world is kind of crazy in Kafka,
Yeah,
but
Kafka is a very straightforward, intelligible human being. He doesn't have any problems internally. Beckett is actually more like this, where there's
Hmm.
There's a certain interior suspicion, especially in the unnameable, where it's like I keep I or the main character's name is the unnameable, and in the sense that you don't know if is he the one speaking or is he repeating words that someone else is giving him, or is that other person the one we are hearing, or has he been replaced at some point along the way and now coming back? Like what is the like there is a certain fundamental doubting of the narrator's voice there. So I feel like I'm not really getting that here so much. I can think of other movies, or I didn't write a note for what the movie was, but just like there's other movies like what's the name of Rosemary's Baby. That's a movie where you're feeling okay. It doesn't do it very well ultimately, but there's a certain amount of tension of
I
like
think that movie's perfect.
yeah. Um, I just have a sort of a minor criticism of it, but
Okay.
but you see there the movie has a tension between am I really getting involved in a conspiracy like where like something's going really weird with my baby like or am I just making all this up? Am I really just nuts? And I'm just sort of making connections that aren't really there. That's
Yeah.
a movie where you really are like, am I just paranoid, or there's something really fucked up happening? Um,
That's a
I
great
did feel
example,
that.
and it might be a better work of art than this because of one thing that I really liked at the beginning of the novel, but by the end I was just rolling my eyes. And this might be a personal response, but occasionally I just wanted to go, focus. And
Well,
I loved the digressions every time, but there's a part of me that was like, well, I think that's the point. There isn't a goal. There is no goal here. We're gonna
well,
get to the point where we're at the place, and there's,
well. What's frustrating to me about the digressions is they didn't go hard enough with them. Like I actually would have liked more of a sense of like like we're just by the end we don't recognize who we are from the beginning. Like if like it was almost like Oedipus was almost like this Heraclitean flux of like by the end of the book she's in Nicaragua running guns for the Jewish Society for the Proliferation of Mexican Art, or something like
some
that.
random crap. Yeah, right.
Like,
Yeah.
and we got there by just a series of seemingly negligible steps. Like I was hoping the book would end like that,
Yeah.
where it's like so completely off topic, and you're just like overwhelmed by the sense of nothing stable. But it wasn't that way. It was like the structure of the book was a traditional detective novel, or a
Yeah.
hard-boiled detective movie. It even has the scene where like there you have this other character coming in, giving you like the lowdown about all the other stuff happening.
Yeah.
Um, in that exact same tone, which I like the way he captured that tone. It was so just absurd with this, talking about the bones of GIs.
Oh yeah, like I didn't like let me be clear on this. Like Pynchon's a good writer. Like I had a good time reading this. But we're holding things, I mean, we're going with the highest standards here. We gotta did it hit me? There were moments where I was hit, but as a whole, I was kind of left wanting, as I think you're right, pushing it totally further, because if he's really challenging what is real, then the narrative that it's a detective form kind of undermines that because it just stays in that path, that archetype, so, or whatever it is, that storytelling maneuver doesn't break down. It is traditional, and it should have broken it into something else, something that I think he does do in Gravity's Rainbow, but doesn't quite get to it here.
Yeah, another aspect of this is what his universe is this it's very pop art,
Yeah.
like his world. It's and I don't really get it on some level of there's a lot of different kinds of pop artists. Like Rosenquist is a pop artist. Like, yeah, he has these massive, painted collages of advertisements, and it's like there's something really disconcerting, disquieting about these things. I feel like there's like it's ominous. You look at someone like Kleis Oldenburg, and he has these like just grotesque looking pies and clarinets or whatever sort of industrial product. And like it's clearly a criticism,
Yeah.
or even like Warhol, who I don't think is a very good artist, but I do give him respect of like, yeah, he conveys that sense of being a cheap, mass-produced, and anonymous product um, very well on a certain level. And I don't really understand how to interpret Pynchon's collage. Like, what is his attitude towards all these different things he's pinching together of, British rock artists and right wing fanatics and, Jacobean literature, and what is all this adding up to? What's his stance towards it all?
So, okay. First of all, you're not alone. I mean, how could you not be? Obvious question. Like you're kind of asking the question, right? I think it's the question, and it's almost an ontological question, right? It's like, what is this in the broadest sense, and why are we doing this? And there was an article I read or I saw. I want to go read it, but I just didn't have time. That was trying to make the argument that Pynchon is sort of liminal, like in between. No, this is really happening. You're supposed to take it as literally as possible, and this is a metaphor. And he's trying to like ride that line between real and not real as much as possible. And I could see that with like the names, where the names are like, they're not names. I mean, I'm just gonna say it. They're not really names. Like they're more anime name. They're more like animated TV show names. And so my response is this: I literally read this book picturing in my head an animated TV show. And that weirdly worked in my head. Like
Yeah, no,
it weirdly makes sense.
I actually had that image for a while. Actually, particularly in the motel scene. Um, when it's like, oh, like because it literally was something that I've seen in anime, where it was like, oh, like the character is going to do like strip,
Whoa! Oh no, I'm gonna.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, into the bottle that pops out. But it was like the whole joke about like, oh, we're gonna do strip poker and or something like that, and now I'm gonna go into the bathroom and put on all the clothing in my luggage, and now I'm like this big bulbous obese thing.
Right.
Um, and it was just like, yeah, that's a very childish, adolescent kind of joke. It's funny. It's funny. I'm not belittling him when I'm saying that, exactly, because that's what he's going for. I mean, the scene, while that's going on, you're also having this just absolutely absurd, like children's show about, a man and his son and their dog in the submarine with the dog on the periscope,
And they all die.
and they all fucking die. That was great.
That might have been actually my single favorite little thing in the book, is that telling of the periscope and the dog thing, because you're like, this is ridiculous. And then you're like, oh yeah, and they die. And you're like, oh my God. Wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Now this isn't. Well, I was happy about that. But what I guess what is like it is a cartoon. Like it is definitively a cartoon. This is not a piece of naturalist literature, by any.
Although there are points where he suddenly goes, just a couple points where he gives like right at the beginning, his characterization of Mucho Moss
Yeah,
is
yeah. Actually, that was a high point of the book for me was Mucho Mas because he has this existential angst about like selling used cars and how it's like this is an imprint of your character you have in your car and how can you just trade that away back and forth like it's nothing.
yeah,
Um,
and the description of him was very naturalistic, and I thought, I wonder, okay, this is a horrible thought, but like we don't have to give Pynchon always the benefit of the doubt. I sometimes wonder if those inserts are there, like, no, 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 I can write. Here's like I swear I can write. I mean, I don't actually believe that, but I think part of me goes like, did you do that to prove to me that you have writing chops?
yeah, like there was a that was a bit of that, and there was like a number of metaphors that really stood out just with blazing clarity to me. Like I actually really
Yeah.
liked the one where it's well, I don't think it was I don't know what it was. Like was she in an airplane or looking at a map or something? But she's looking, looking at the suburbs and how they're all like stretched out in this very regular pattern, and
Yeah.
it reminded her of a circuit of a little microchip in a radio and it's like it has that same sense of this inscrutable meaning,
Yeah.
which I thought was like that's a great way of entering San Narciso.
Oh,
Um,
and here's another one that goes exactly with that. Behind, it's in the same passage, I think. Behind the hieroglyphic streets, there would either be a transcendent meaning or only the earth.
hmm,
I just thought that was like the
yeah,
whole message of the whole book, right?
yeah, that's a great one of um, too much or nothing. Um,
So do you think, here's my real question. Do you think that the reason why, because I feel like we're in pretty much solid agreement on some of the problems. We might understand the novel differently, but do you think that there is a work that could be carved out of this? Like if you change some of the names or cut out some of the stuff, do you think there would be a way to fix it, so to speak?
yeah, I feel. I guess it depends on what
Yeah.
we're carving out. Um, there's one sense in which I want to really like this absolute kitchen sink approach to art where it's like you're taking every single dimension of Western literature and you're just throwing it out there. I mean, that's kind of what Finnegan's Wake is supposed to be like from what I can sort of glimmer, but I don't bother to I really don't bother to read those sentences for meaning when I read Finnegan's Wake.
Just
It's
letting it hit you like the waves.
yeah, and it's like but I feel like there's something to do there where you do have this mixture of songs and detective fiction and period drama and uh I don't even know. We with all that's put together and like you somehow carve out an attitude towards life or you just have this sense of everything's fiction. Everything in life is this sort of collage.
Hmm.
Um, I can imagine, and everything's fake. But and maybe you're even approving of that. You like the fakeness. You delight in it.
Or there's a sense of freedom that comes from the breadth of technique and material that's available to you. Because for Pynchon, it's like all of history is now available to you as material.
Yeah.
All of this is
Well,
material. Songs are material. It's expanding what one could do in that sense. That's one positive thing.
yeah. So I'm like, and
I'm
like
getting with you though.
play that kind of at least it was a little bit. It's not really like this, but you keep thinking of it. It's a fairly short Dadaist play by Yvonne Gall. It worked on it with George Grosz,
Mhm.
um, where it's just it's just the most bitter and bizarre satire I've ever seen. Where you just have like you know it's an attack on the bourgeoisie and all of that. And at one point, the sun comes in, and the sun is representative of the new man, the new business personality. And it's literally, his nose is a telephone receiver. He's got a radio, um, thing coming out. Every time he starts speaking, it starts with hello, hello, in this harsh robotic fashion.
Oh, that's
Um,
great.
the mouth is a telephone dot. It's great. It's great. Like, and then there's another scene where this young fiery rebel is trying to seduce this girl, and his ego, super ego, and id are all different characters arguing with each other on stage. And it's like, I am so on board with this. This is so fucking nuts. I love this.
And it's also pushing it further in a sense than what Pynchon does.
Yeah, and it's like, but one thing, but what makes it all stand together is the pure venomous invective of the work. And if I had more of a clear sense of Pynchon's feeling here of like, yeah, like I really just I'm at one point in love with this detachment from reality and the all the intricacies of it. And I'm also terrified by it at the same time. Like I okay, if that was his attitude and I could clearly see that, I fantastic, but I'm just not feeling it.
So
Um,
do you get the sense, because I think you're hitting on something I completely follow. When I first read this, I was very enamored by the breadth of material. Um, in a similar way, when I first read like Edward Albee's The American Dream, just the idea of taking a baby and dicing it up into little pieces. Like everyone gets a piece of the baby, or I forget how they actually did it, but it's horrifying. But it kind of has a similar detachment. Although that one's trying to make a point. I guess in Pynchon, I'm missing like is he a nihilist? Like is this just like fun? Like is there no meaning to this? Or is it something else? Meaning this. My thought is I wonder if he's trying to give us a like freedom from meaning, I guess, in some ass backwards way, where you're invested with all these signifiers. And I'm wondering if the message is there is no, it's a Wizard of Oz sort of message. Like there's no ultimate meaning behind the curtain. I'm not sure. What do you think?
yeah, it's well, I mean, like when I to that point of like maybe he just doesn't feel like there's any meaning behind it, or he's it's all empty, is actually just the fact the names are the names that they are. I feel like he's winking at us. Like he's saying like, "Oh, isn't this goofy? Yes, I'm writing this book. Isn't it funny that I'm writing a book?" And I feel like there's a number of I should have written them down, but there was a number of other like little moments in it where you could hear him winking at you.
Oh yeah.
Um, and it just felt, and it's like, well, it in a weird way, it's a bit like that phrase you like of running a limited liability company, of you're not putting yourself fully out there, and that's what that sort of thing is like. Oh, look how goofy it is, and I'm
Oh,
catching you from this. Now there is a sense in which no, that really is his fundamental attitude. He really just feels the universe is superficial and stupid or meaningless or cheap or vulgar. And there's a way of presenting that in a profound way. I think that's possible, but I'm just not getting it here. It doesn't strike me as he's profoundly conveying the universe is cheap. It's or he's profoundly conveying the universe is superficial. It's just no, he's just super superficial person. By the way,
or
all this hypothesis, I'm not sure. I'm just putting things out there.
oh, I mean, I love it. I kind of think that when I first read this, when I grew up, I just started watching Rick and Morty. Because like Rick and Morty, there's a lot of similar themes. The universe is incredibly zany. Then I mean, Mr. Poopy Butthole, but Mr. Poopy Butthole is like this fucking tragic character who gets shot. I mean, it's horrifying and it's great. And so I do kind of wonder if like Pynchon was a stepping stone, but really there's no there's no comic or tragic sense. There's a local comedy, but in Rick and Morty, there is a huge tragic sense
Yeah, Rick and
that
Morty.
really works.
Yeah, Rick and Morty is just one of those shows that transcends tone, uh,
Mm.
where it's at the same time like, yeah, this is an absolutely zany Saturday morning cartoon, that's pointing out how zany and much like a Saturday morning with a character like that with that name. Um, and at the same time, there are genuine moments where like it's actually tugging at your heartstrings because you care about Rick and he does genuinely care about Morty, and there's real relationships, and like I don't know how you achieve this bizarre combination, but at least to some real extent, the creators did.
They
Um,
did. And
and
I would also
I did
say
not, and I did not, and that's the problem with like Crying of Lot 49 is I don't believe in any of these characters. I don't believe in Oedipa Ma. Like she doesn't have a character. She doesn't. She's just a sort of a cipher and not in an interesting way. And the same thing, it's like, oh, you got the crazy German doctor, and you have this I don't know this child actor turned lawyer. It's like
but
none
they're
of
all cartoons.
it's not even that like they're either cartoons and they're so overdone, or they're just kind of just flat. They aren't anything. They're just to be mean about it, they're just poorly written. In that I don't know who these are. I don't know what they value. I don't know how they think. I don't know how they talk. I can't imagine Oedipa Ma. I can imagine other
Mucho.
characters in other books, but I can't imagine her.
Well, isn't that partially because I don't think she's ever described.
Yeah, but you don't need to. You don't need to like going back to our last book or short stories. You remember very clearly what Yonich was like as a young man.
Yeah.
You know him. You know even like the Turkin family, like all those people. Like you know exactly what the mother's like and the father and the daughter, even though they're
Yeah.
even even just the husband of the lady with the little dog is like, yeah, he gets like I don't know half a paragraph, and I know the exact kind of cringing, pathetic lackey that
Uh,
he is. And it's like, okay, we had a little novella about Oedipa Ma. She is the lens through which we see the novel, and I can't tell you a single thing about her. So I don't believe like even Kafka, Franz K or K, in the Castle or the Trial, you believe in him. You
yeah.
believe in this character. He's a very anonymous kind of person. You don't get a lot of background, but you understand how he thinks. You know how he handles a situation. You know what he would do next. You believe in him, but you don't believe in Oedipa Ma.
Yeah, and even like you remember like, well, what do you like about her? And I was like, well, I like the characterization of paranoia. The problem with that description is that that's not a character, that's an illness.
Yeah,
Like that's so like yeah, I liked that aspect of it, but it actually reveals I think you're not just onto something. I think this book would have been a masterpiece if not even all the characters have the zany characters, if three of the characters were real people. I
yeah,
think I think you're right. I actually wonder if he can write a character. I think this might be our in towards the flaw of the book because I mean, look at it. So here's this dialogue. Doesn't it sound like the same person's talking? Okay, so come on in, Oedipa yelled. Tears sprang to Hilarius's eyes. You aren't going to shoot? The cop tried the door. It's locked. Hey, he said. Bust it down, roared Oedipa, and Hitler Hilarious here will foot the bill. Like, she makes a joke, but like everyone makes a joke. Not
yeah,
everyone's funny. Some
yeah.
people are funny. Also, no one has the same sense of humor, and all the jokes are Pynchon's sense of humor. They're not individual. It's like the only subject is Pynchon.
Yeah, and that's what there's a sense in which it's a cartoon, in that it's zany and wild. But there's also a bad way that's a cartoon of it's like,
Mhm.
yeah, these characters are not filled out. Like it's just whatever. Like I don't believe in these sequences.
Isn't that why I mean, you might, I mean, I don't know, you won't know my experience, but for me, when I think of the novel as having a slightly nihilistic bent, I'm wondering if what I'm really getting is the feeling of not engaging with people.
Well,
You know,
no, I don't
or
think it is nihil. There's a way of interpreting it, and I think it's a very legitimate way of interpreting it as nihilistic in that, it's winking at you when it has names like that.
or
It's
when it literally says you go to page what is it, 80 or 70, and the address is the page number and the previous page number.
oh,
Like,
I didn't know that.
okay, let me see if I'll find it really quick. It's just stupid, but it's kind of great. Like, it's one of those moments where you're like, whoa, what? I'll find it after the podcast, but it's like it's you turn to the page and it says it was at 70, previously at 69, and you're on page 70 and you were previously on 69, and you're kind of like, haha. But you're also a little like that's a really great motion because you do enter into the paranoia just a little bit. You're like, was that on purpose?
Yeah,
That
yeah.
was a nice little trick. I mean, it's just a trick, but it was a good trick, I think.
Well, yeah. I mean that's clever, but it's like here's a contrast of a breaking the fourth wall moment that I really like.
Yeah.
It's in Samuel Beckett's Murphy. It has a paragraph where it's describing in somewhat detail the shape of a certain woman's body, and it's not a very appetizing woman, but there's some kind of leering quality to that paragraph.
Hmm.
And but it's again like this is kind of gross. Then it has just a sentence right after that paragraph that says, "The above paragraph was designed to deprave the reader." Um, no, I just love that line. Like
uh,
it's so wacky. It's so
it's human
colorful,
too. It's more human. Like, so that I found the Pynchon. So
and
he
it's
goes,
so ironic.
yeah,
And
yeah.
it's not from the perspective that is just the narrator. The narrator is not a character. But he's making that line, and I love that. Or in other parts of the book, it says, we'll be sure to tell you about Murphy's daylight, twilight, and nighttime zones in section 6. And and then later on, it was like, again, we will be discussing this in section 6. And like I love that it's wild and it works in a way that the fourth wall breaks and Pynchon sort of fail to. I don't know why. It's more just I don't I actually that is a real thing I don't have an answer to is why does Beckett get away with this while Pynchon it's like, oh yeah, you think you're clever, don't you? Um
I think that's a great point. I mean, I wonder. So like, this is the section. The stamp designed blah 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 was reproduced under the title Tristero Rapid Post and should have been inserted between local listings 139, the Third Avenue Post Office of New York, and 140, Union Post, also of New York. You're on 140, and the previous page is 139. So, but
yeah,
it's
yeah,
kind of
local.
that maybe here's a thing I thought, and this is only something I'd have from an older person perspective compared to when I first read it. When I first read it, again, there's this transgressive, oh, I didn't know you were allowed to do that. Whereas now, I mean, obviously we know tons of authors who are doing all sorts of interesting techniques. It's not that you can't just be fascinated with like a silly technique. Now I think it's
Well,
kind of a dad joke.
yeah, it is.
I mean,
Actually, Christ, that's fucking mean and completely accurate. That's a dad joke. And I actually on that same when you said that, I thought you saying, oh God, I didn't know. We could do that, and my response is, yeah, and now you know why we don't. Um,
dad joke. Yeah.
It's like, I'm sorry, I don't get your point here. Now I do think it's a little unfair of me saying that because I don't know why Beckett gets away with it in Murphy. I need to reread it more. It makes sense why he gets away with it in Unnameable because the whole book is about narration. It's about this unnameable thing we call the self who's narrating. So it has a point there. So I need to work on that. Another, let's see. There's another aspect of and there's other things like the fact that Tristero, like I don't know, I guess that's the major organization behind everything. It's like it's sometimes spelled with a Y and sometimes spelled with an I. Great. I don't. What does this say? I don't know or care. Um, it just sort of strikes me as something like, okay, you did that so that there'd be some people who'd go in and try to see if there's a distinction when it's used. But again, I don't. Yeah, you can do that. You can misspell things in your own book if you like. Um,
Oh, okay, wait. I mean, first of all, I don't know what it was, and this is another thing that I'm just like makes me question things. Is there were some so my edition, I just did the Harper Modern Classics reprint.
yeah, I got the same one.
Okay, there were like a lot of misspellings.
Oh, was
That
there?
I came across like four or five. Oh, I lost you visual, by the way.
Oh yeah, no, I'm still here. I'm still here.
Okay, good. You're good. You can yeah, obviously turn off if you need. I I can't. I stopped marking them, but there were a lot of like really obvious misspellings that. And normally, I mean, it's it's a book. There's always going to be a misspelling or two or a word printed wrong. But I found at least like six, and I was like, and then I entered into the voice where I was like, is that on purpose? Is he doing this to me? And I was like, they're fucking misspellings. Even if they are on purpose, who fucking cares? They're just misspellings. Like it wouldn't be
Yeah,
interesting if they were on purpose.
yeah, like that's one thing is I've been trying a little bit to crack into Finnegan's Wake.
Yeah.
Um and I read these analyses of it and my feeling is like, yeah, even if all these puzzles do add up to something, if there is like some deeper system that Joyce has put there, I don't care.
Hmm.
It's like it doesn't give me the experience of reading a novel. Even if there's like a trick to it, it's like there's no reason behind it, even if there's a reason. Like there's such a thing as like actually this gets into a broader issue of accessible versus inaccessible literature. I think something's inaccessible. The only reason why something should be inaccessible is because it couldn't be anything else. You
I
know,
would
it's
agree.
like
It has to be that way.
it's like, okay, if you're going to write a poem, you really have to just be as concise as possible, and because of that, it might be hard to read the first couple of times. Um, you might really need some help to get all the layers of meaning that are being packed into this this diamond like compactness.
Yeah.
And that's so it's like, okay, yes, that's inaccessible for that reason. I'm okay with that. But if you don't have a good reason, if you're just putting games in to put games in, it's like, well, I don't care. It's all this effort for nothing that I can actually personally experience. Um,
So, in regards to the Pynchon, first of all, I think that I I don't know if I like my own opinion on this. I feel like it's like the ultimate bourgeoisie smart person funny book. Like, did you see? Look at that nice thing from history. That was funny. You knew that. And if you didn't, now you do because you looked it up. And there's something cheap about that. I think what he's trying to get at is that there is no vast conspiracy and his name is Frank. Like, but it comes off occasionally as, oh, you like music theory? He was, humming a 12-tone melody, which I died at. I
Yeah,
personally
that
think
was funny. That was funny. Or like
yeah.
the bar where they play like fucking Stockhausen. It's like that's
Oh,
great.
that was great. That I think that was enough though. Like that touch was great because it really, first of all, that one of the messages Pynchon's hitting you with is this high art, is this low art? And then he goes like this to you and walks away, right? Like,
Yeah.
you know, like,
Yeah,
and that
it's
worked, but I still, I'm with you. There's this idea that like I think he thinks the message of his play, what the fuck, the message of his book
no it's a
is
play.
sure, yeah, it's a plays in there. Yeah, there is like a whole summary of a play. Um, there's there's like a sense that he's trying to tell you that it doesn't have meaning, but how he's doing that is giving you intense amounts of signifiers. But again, I guess I could say, so what? I mean, I'm not getting what I would call like the kernel of like saving power, you know, or whatever it is of the novel. That's like I'm not getting a message or anything, or
Yeah,
like a way of life in that, in a sense that I would
yeah,
want
like
to.
here's like I couldn't keep watching the show because the sitcom parts were just too much for me to actually just deal with. But there is a show called Kevin Can Go Fuck Himself. Um, and it's the premise is a big chunk of the show is a sitcom with stale, flat sitcom lighting, with that same one angle, with those sort of tedious jokes, with the laugh track playing. And then as soon as Kevin, the sort of the lovable jackass, which is the center of so many sitcoms, leaves the room, we then focus on the wife, who's and now everything is a regular drama like Breaking Bad, with good cinematography, interesting lighting, and somewhat competent writing and all of that stuff. And it's like
Yeah.
I like that transgression of like, oh, we're going back and forth, and the reason why is because Kevin is wrecking her life. You know, Kevin is making her life much worse. And it seems funny from this one perspective until you actually take it seriously in the other. Like the way he sees himself is he's just playing along. He's just a great guy. That's how his friends see him. But like, no, it's not that way. There's actually a human tragedy under the surface here. Um,
Ooh, that's good.
and I couldn't keep watching the show because the sitcom was too much of a sitcom. Maybe you would have a different experience. But yeah, I like that idea, but this wasn't doing that. It just felt like, yeah, we're just mixing in every kind of zany media, of children's movies and TV series to rock and roll ballads about Lolita, and occasional mentions of like electroacoustic music, and like an 18th century Jacobean plays or whatever that was.
Okay, I want to take a different avenue for a couple minutes.
Yeah. Okay.
I I think we've lambasted him. I think we've I think we've hit him. So now I want to go for a little bit more charitable reading, and I found a passage um that'll back up a little bit of what I want to try. And I'm totally fine if you completely shoot this theory down. We can entertain it a little bit, but I here's a possible other reading of this text. So at the end of the book, about a little bit over halfway through, Oedipumus loses the shrink, Dr. Hilarious, who was a Nazi all along. I don't know, it doesn't matter. And then goes to see her husband, and her husband's now an LSD dope fiend, basically, right? And this is the paragraph. She goes, "My shrink, pursued by Israelis, has gone mad. My husband on LSD gropes like a child further and further into the rooms and endless rooms of the elaborate candy house of himself, and away, hopelessly away from what has passed. I was hoping forever for love. My one extramarital fella has eloped with a depraved 15-year-old. My best guide back to the Trastero has taken Brody, where am I? So I think this paragraph is important because, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think Oedipa Maas is ever physically described how tall she is, or, I mean, she has an age, but there's not much physical description characteristic wise, right?
Mm-hmm.
I I wonder if the less funny way to read this book is that there is a horror of the loss of subjectivity. Because when I read that passage, she does care that her husband is drifting away.
Yeah, there is something more human there, and that's something that to me is like disappointing, is that there just isn't more of that.
Yeah,
Like, here's another kind of, let's see, like, okay, like one thing that this reminds me of is Brazil, a movie dear to both of our hearts.
yeah,
Brazil is just bonkers in terms of like the level of satire in that movie. It's so over the top in, just, I don't know, like consumers for Christ. Having having an advertisement for, fully armed security, uh, let's see, fully armed security ship boat, whatever it is, like vacation boat. One of those one cruise ship, fully armed cruise ship, so that you can actually be in security while you're, on this very frivolous thing. It's like that's great. There's I'm trying to remember other like little things in there that are just like, yeah, that's just so over the top what you're doing. But then there's a consistent human kernel in
yeah.
throughout the work, and even the people who are like caricatures of humanity, there's a certain moment of like, one thing I loved was just like the way you have two of these basically like SWAT team people who've always just remained anonymous throughout the movie. They just run in and attack people and ruin their lives. And you happen to be in a truck and you're seeing them and they're taking their helmets off while they're, all of these people who they've like, arrested are hanging from bags that, with little openings like that, horrifying.
Oh yeah.
They're just taking off their helmet. Like, God, I just can't stand having that helmet on. You can barely see where you are at all.
Oh,
Um, and it's just like, oh my God, he's a human being too? What? Um, there's this.
that's so true. Or a different movie that actually I thought did a great job of that in one scene, when Rogue One, when the stormtroopers are kind of talking amongst themselves, and they have that tiny little human moment, and you're like, it's the same thing. You're like, oh, okay, that's funny. And that's where, like, in Star Wars Episode 7 fails for me so miserably, because it's kind of just a pastiche. But that Rogue One was great, and it had that little like, oh, I guess you guys aren't your clones, but you're people too. So, or
Yeah,
close to people.
yeah, and it's like it's important. What we want here is we want the tragedy of the unreal. Like we want like that's sort of what we're looking for. Like like because you're a big Baudrillard guy, of the idea of like the passing of the real, of everything's going to be the hyper real, everything's going to be this sort of fake, inauthentic replacement of genuine experience. Um, and we're not getting that, or we'd like it, whereas like almost like this nihilistic reveling in like these
I was gonna say,
triumphs of hyper real. Like that would be something that we'd like, that we would be behind. Like I can imagine, like again in a very Dadaist fashion, this sort of furious, hate filled, yeah, like screw reality, we're done with reality, we live in reference alone. Like that would be, I could enjoy a work of art that had that stance. But here I'm not seeing that. I'm not feeling that.
You know what I get more than that now when I read this is like I'm in a history class. Like this is a period of American literature, and it kind of fits with the 60s. Like it
Yeah,
feels like the 60s. And
yeah, it's
that,
very dated.
yeah,
Um,
like, you get Charles
Beatlemania.
Manson, Beatlemania, and zany Americana. And on one hand, I like the tone quality of zany Americana. None of that's the problem. The problem is exactly what you said. There's no meaningful. Wouldn't it be amazing if you just add? So you didn't take anything out of this book. You just added a character named Bob, and Bob is a really well fleshed out normal or just like a subject with neuroses or whatever, and just and very interesting. And Bob is just Oedipa Moss's friend, and the tragedy is Bob watching Oedipa Moss chasing larks or something. Like there's no human element to Oedipa Moss doing the tragedy, whereas with someone who's actually going through paranoia, the reason it's tragic is because it of the view from the outside of someone else watching the person go through the motions. That was a
Yeah,
long deal, but I think that's what it's missing. Because I
yeah,
love the characterization of paranoia, but I agree that that doesn't make a person a great character. I think you're actually right. I would change my mind on that.
okay. I was somewhat concerned about like, oh God, like this is going to be the rift that's going to end our friendship. Over Pynchon. No, I'm kidding. That's a
Okay, wait, but I actually like the thing I like about it is not its greatness. I like that he gives you these bags of techniques and you're like almost waiting for a better writer to come along and use them in a more devastating way.
mhm.
Like you're referencing Beckett, I was referencing Rick and Morty, where similar techniques are happening, but they're just more beautiful, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. That's what's disappointing about the book. Ultimately, is that it's like, oh yeah, like that's a nice direction. There's something to that. Like, I mean, just another little bit from Beckett.
Mm-hmm.
Um, is at the end of Malloy, you have a character who's just, just dragging himself through the mud as Beckett characters do.
Yeah.
Um, and he's like and he gets to a point where he's just contemplating these different questions. Actually, I just have to just go and read it because it's just the greatest goddamn thing.
Sure.
It takes us. I think it should stand out pretty clearly. Oh fuck! Here we go. Certain questions of a theological nature preoccupied me strangely. As for example, what value is to be attached to the theory that Eve sprang not from Adam's rib, but from a tumor in the fat of his leg, arse? Did the serpent crawl, or as Comster affirms, walk upright? Did Mary conceive through the ear, as Augustine and Adobard assert? How much longer are we to hang about waiting for the Antichrist? Really matter which hand is employed to upsturge the podex? What is one to think of the Irish oath sworn by the natives with the right hand on the relics of the saints and the left on the virile member? Does, does nature observe the Sabbath? Is it true that the devils do not feel the pains of hell? The algebraic theology of Craig. What is one to think of this? Is it true that the infant Saint Rocher refused to suck on Wednesdays and Fridays? What is one to think of the excommunication of vermin in the 16th century?
It goes on.
It's just like this goes on. It's just like it's fantastic. What was God doing with himself before creation? Might not the beatific vision become a source of boredom in the long run? Is it true that Judas's torments are suspended on Saturdays? What if the mass for the dead were read over the living? It's just like it's just this. I love that like sporadic, or of course, the even more famous, was it Encyclopedia of Infinite Learning, of Borges, where it's just
Oh yeah.
it's
Okay.
like that's just wonderful, like the spastic quality of it, and I want a book that's more spastic. Like it has
Yeah.
that. like I can almost okay, is there a film for you that sort of captures this quality of just being completely out there? This isn't nearly as crazy enough as I'd like, but it's like the only thing I can think of is like, Quentin Tarantino and like there's a like he
I got one.
okay.
Fooly Cooley.
Okay.
Fooly Cooley is so Pynchon. I mean, even though take out Tristero and put in the word Fooly Cooley. No Fooly Cooley. No one outside. No Fooly Cooley. It's like a Fooly Cooley dream thing, and it like Fooly Cooley is a fascination with material.
Mhm.
And I would actually say Fooly Cooley is better than this too, but that's a new thing. I would have before said that this was better, but in Fooly Cooley you have the same thing, but it's very meta in terms of referencing anime itself instead of history. But I think Fooly Cooley is very similar to Pynchon, but takes it to the place I wish it would go, like with the
Yeah.
collage.
Yeah. I guess one thing we want out of this because art is trauma.
Yeah.
Like what is actually something that we got out of this book, either for you originally or the third time for me, for this first time, that just breaks you out of habit, that makes you feel like, okay, I didn't see the world that way before.
Um. Okay, so I want to answer that, but I also want to read you the place that I thought to give him a little credit, the place where it was super spastic.
Yeah.
I loved. Okay, so he goes to Nefastus' house, who's a pedophile, and
Yes.
he goes, "I'm sorry," she called in, surprisingly about to cry with frustration, her voice breaking. "It's no use." Nefastus came to her and put an arm around her shoulders. "It's okay," he said. "Please don't cry. Come on in the couch. The news will be on at any moment. We can do it there." "It?" said Oedipa. "Do it what?" "Have sexual intercourse," replied Nefastus. "Maybe there'll be something about China tonight. I like to do it while they talk about Vietnam, but China is best of all. You think about all those Chinese teeming, the profusion of life. It makes it sexier, right?" And you're like, "No!" And then he goes, "God," Oedipus screamed and
And this is
fled.
right after she spent, 15 minutes staring at a picture of James Clerk Maxwell in order to decrease entropy
Right.
between two cylinders,
So in terms of
and thereby
zaniness,
create energy.
yeah, that in terms of zaniness and kind of like spasticness, I think those 2 or 3 pages might have got there for me.
Yeah, yeah. Like if it could have kept that up, um, if it just could have kept up that level of mania, but it's still, yeah. Let's see. Okay, so on a personal level for me, what did I get from this weird thing? I guess the number one thing is just sort of a sense of, well, I want to say it's like, okay, seeing the world as a sort of like collage of cultural artifacts, but I can't connect this world to anything in my life. Like I can't actually see like looking at the world differently now. It's like, yeah, like I deal with all kinds of different media and I have different things ringing around in my head. And, sort of, like there is that quality in my life, but I don't see that being fleshed out thanks to Pynchon. I don't feel more alive to that aspect of human experience now. In the way that, like when I read Joyce, like I feel like when I'm reading him, like wow, I am really getting a much better sense of how thoughts and feelings and memories and speculations and doubts and conversation are all just this one textured surface. How it's all one material, this bricolage, like
Yeah.
that. And I'm more aware of that when I read Joyce. I'm not getting that with Pynchon. I'm not getting that sense of how, yeah, all these different kinds of media are the singular substance that I'm dealing with. So I want to. I mean, the only thing I'm really getting in a sense is this sort of like, oh yeah, Pynchon. Here's a place in literature. This sort of combination of four different authors. It sort of reminds me of this one painter, Brzezinski. I can't remember his first name, but he does these like horrifying hell pictures, and it's to me, it's
I know him.
like
Yeah, I
that
know
if
him
it were
pretty
good.
well.
I would like that if it were good, but Brzezinski, I can't help whenever I see him just feeling like that's kind of cheap. This is not Bosch. This is not Bruegel. This is not Dolly. This is not Giger. This is not Bacon. It's just not good enough to be in any of those categories.
Yeah, it's
I
like if you get really high, you'll like it. But if you're sober, it's cheap. It's relying so much on its scare factor. Yeah, Brzezinski is a great example for that cheapness, I think. I would agree.
Yeah. So for you, I mean, I will give him this of the idea of I want to find a novel or some kind of literature that could make me alive to this sort of like postmodern collage that could make me feel that could put me into that mental state better. Like I want to find that now, but I haven't found it yet.
It's like he's not the best arbiter of his own message, maybe.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent way of putting it.
Well, I think that's my response too. Is so the first time I read it, this would have been, and I forgot it wasn't in undergrad. It would have actually been in high school. And now I'm like, wait a minute. This would have been my first experience of anything like this.
mhm.
So what I found revelatory was that just all it gets away with. Now I would say it doesn't get away with it, but what at the time I perceived as it getting away with the names, the jokes, the sense of reality is something so plastic that you could do something with it. For some reason, I still have it today, and here is probably the best I can do with Pynchon. Thinking of all the critiques we have and all the ones I agree with, while reading this, I started writing fiction again. Makes me want to write. And I think that's I think that is the good, is it inspires me with its otherworldly weirdness. But it also, a masterpiece doesn't make me want to write. It makes me want to go cry. Like there's something about it that is in that middle of that room where it's like, no, it's not perfect. It makes me want to write though. And I think that's why I like Pynchon, is Pynchon always makes me want to be a artist.
Yeah, I feel like there is that kind of art. Our friend Matthew is very much that way. It's like he always likes looking at things for the sort of like potentials, and it's like, oh, wouldn't it? I like the sort of
Yeah,
window of possibility this is opening up, and like that's what you're talking about here. Is like, oh yeah, here's some unmined territory. Like it's fertile. I just want to actually make it succeed at what it does.
I think that's completely fair. And I think that's why when I think of it as an artist, I think of the potential. And so the years go on and I think of it as this rosy potential that I love. And then I go back and read it and I go, no, the potential is me. It's not, it's the potential. Well, that's not really what I mean, but yeah, like the potential is what I'm going to make out of reading this, not what's actually in the document, because I think that the local level of the Pynchon's great, but the characters and the larger form, I don't have anything to say about them.
Yeah,
So Yeah, I think that's it.
Do you think I mean, how do you compare this to Gravity's Rainbow?
So Gravity's Rainbow, I'm assuming it probably still has the same basically nihilistic point of view, but what it does do that this doesn't do is it follows its tangents to the end. Like a man gets sucked into a toilet and meets people in the toilet world. So instead of it being like a, oh, I hope I don't get sucked into that toilet, you do get sucked in, and there's like a whole bunch of things that zany crap that happens. Also, on the level of the writing, um, I think that I think his downfall is that I don't think he learns how to write a character until Against the Day. I mean, that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but when I'm reading Against the Day, there's characters that are human and they're nice, and you're like, oh, that's wild. They're not plastic. So I think he does get better. I mean, one should. This was in the 70s. One hopes one gets better. In Gravity's Rainbow, I don't remember there being any brilliant character development at all, but I do remember that he takes the paranoia to the limit, much farther than what happens in here. So, for example, like on page one, I mean, the premise of the book is just that there's a guy who has sex with people, and then that's where the Germans bomb. And so that's the conspiracy, not the male one, but that everywhere he has sex, that's where they're going to be bombed the next day. Um, but he also is paranoid that he's being followed. And the next paragraph is good, good. Now he knows about us. And it switches to the perspective of whoever's following him. So it's a lot more epic. I mean, it's like 700 pages. So some of the things that are not fleshed out in Crying of Lot 49 are, and you get that. However, I think that some of your critiques will probably just be just as the same. You know, is this all just kind of fun and games? And part of me thinks, yeah, it's just kind of nicely written fun and games.
Yeah, and I feel like I'm missing something on some level of, it's like, okay, like you ask, if you were to ask Pynchon or someone like him, like, well, okay, like, yeah, like, I don't see you saying anything meaningful, and the response would be, yeah, that was the point. Like, it is just wacky and zany. That's all there is to life. You don't have deep emotions. It's just a sort of smirking. Um, and I feel, and it's hard to tell, is that an attitude that is capable of deep, profound emotion? Or is that, and I'm just missing it in this particular situation, or is that an attitude that's it's just incapable of
Yeah,
conveying it? It's like, yeah, like, yeah, like, if you really just think life's just a bunch of stupid games, then just make a bunch of stupid games, and it won't be worth experiencing. Like, there is, so that's a possibility. So I do have, I don't feel like when I read Chekhov, when we read Chekhov, I felt like, yes, I understand this. I get it.
yeah,
This is fully intelligible. With Pynchon, I I feel like it is just ultimately not that good, not that special of a work, but I'm willing to be convinced otherwise, or at least I'm willing to be convinced that other works by him have more potential or more.
yeah.
Um, so yeah. Any other last notes about Pynchon?
I guess my last note would say, like I think that I with Pynchon, I do find a split in my opinion between my critical faculties and my personal enjoyment.
Mm-hmm.
Like I just kind of liked it. I liked every page. I thought it was zany, thought it was funny. I thought the jokes were goofy. I liked the weird narrative positioning. On every page, there's something I really enjoyed. And so on a personal level, I loved it. Where I go, is like if I'm really being honest with myself, by about page 120, I felt bogged down. And then the critical faculties come in and I go, well, wait a minute, is this a little flat? And I think that's my split, is it's a little flat and it just is a personally appealing document to me. But I can still be aware that it is kind of flat.
Yeah, it's I thought it was okay in terms of likability. It was okay for me. Um, I don't know if I would have finished it had it not been for this. Um, but for the podcast. But I'm glad I read it just to okay, well here's another little star in the constellation of writers. That you can refer to and compare to and all that.
Yeah, it's another name. I mean, because I do think that one check in his favor is if I say the word Pynchon-esque, I do think that carries some weight.
That's a good point. I will say, just the fact that he was able to convey a vision well enough that you can actually, that's Pynchon-esque. It's ironical, it's absurd, it's pedantic, in a knowing way.
Yeah.
It's vulgar. It's just spastic and like in 10 different directions. Um, that's an achievement. That's an achievement, and I will say that all right, well that's a tool that I now have. That is a new word. That's a new way of looking at the world that I have. It didn't resonate with me. I
Yeah.
don't I don't look at the world and feel it's Pynchon-esque in any meaningful way. Like I do feel that the world is Chekhovian
Yeah.
or Flaubertian or
Oh yeah.
Beckettian.
Okay, wait, before we go, I actually would disagree with you on that because while reading this Pynchon book, I had like 10 moments in my life where I was like, that was fucking Pynchon. So
Okay.
the first one was I was thinking, I'm thinking of writing an essay, reading Crying of Lot 49 through the lens of Lacan's Seminar 3, because it's on the psychoses. And his formulation is what's barred from the symbolic shows up in the real. Not important for our podcast, but I was like, well, shit, that's what's happening on every page of this book. Um, Not that that's a good or bad thing, just that that's the structure. So I'm thinking of writing an article on that, and I was like, well, what other people have written about these two writers? And I look up Lacan and Pynchon, and it brings me to Pynchon's Wikipedia, to where Lacanian shows up in a work of his. He references Lacan, and I was like, oh fuck you, Pynchon. Like so I mean, I don't know if that's a good thing, a bad thing, or kind of just a dad joke thing, but I thought it was really funny that in the novel Bleeding Edge, oh, Lacanian shows up, and you're like, of course it fucking does, because he's so encyclopedic that it's all there. So I had that was one moment where I was like, well, that was a kind of funny Pynchon-esque moment.
Yeah, like that sort of pedantic self-referentiality,
Yeah.
which is a Pynchon-esque quality. I mean, I guess I'll just try to think more of it of what are ways in which life is just sort of bizarrely, just sort of this mixture of absurdity and perversity and pedantic and involuted in this kind of funny, not happy-go-lucky, but jaunty kind of way. Uh,
Yeah.
like that's something that's a genuine question to ask to pursue.
One more question I had, just that about this that I realize now is, isn't authority kind of strange in Pynchon? So like in Chekhov or like a traditional writer, authority is sort of just there. There are authorities, there's other authorities. I think in some way Crying of Lot 49 problematizes the notion that there's anyone in charge of like fucking anything.
Um, Not nearly enough for me.
Yeah.
As in, Kafka problematizes that in, the castle of, oh, you thought these other people were that you were dealing with knew something. Well, no, no, they're just pawns of these other much more deep people behind them. And the same thing with, actually in the trial, a similar event happens where it's like, no, you thought those lawyers were clever people? No, they're just lackeys. Uh,
Yeah.
and so I that idea of problematizing. I mean, Ayn Rand, she also problematizes authority in a way of like, yeah, like you think that there's some conspiracy or there's some sort of Satan with a sword that's driving these problems, but no, it's just the lout down the street at the drugstore. It's like it's just by inertia, by indifference that
Yeah.
something this perverse can happen in this world. And Pynchon, it's like I don't know enough about the authorities for them to even be problematized. There isn't enough whispering about them. There isn't enough rumor. There isn't enough bizarre interactions or anything for me to like. No, okay, yeah. There's this weird turf war between the postmaster general and anti-Semites or whatever they are. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, okay. The one thing is when Dr. Hilarious lambastes Freud. Um, no, you're right. That's silly. I mean, there really wasn't anything there. It was just funny. But that was an example of an authority being challenged. But no, you're right. I mean, there wasn't really any meaningful interaction there. Uh,
Yeah, I'm just thinking of some other kind of example of the sort of. I mean, the father or Miss Julie. No, no, I'm not.
well,
Uh,
your examples were perfectly fine. I mean, I actually think that like I shot myself in the foot when I said that about authority because like I mean, fuck, you're right. That's Kafka, and he kind of I wouldn't say he owns that. I just think he wins at that. You know what I mean? Like he kind of wins at that Wizard of Oz perpetually delayed type
yeah,
writing and yeah.
yeah,
So
and I just have to say, like talking about just Kafka, it just feels like, oh God, a breath of fresh air. Like I just compared to Pynchon. It's just on such a different level as an artist.
yeah, I think
But
you're right.
I'm glad for engaging with Pynchon. He has that very particular attitude, which I'll be exploring more into the future.
Just not any attitude you should have in the world. It's the what's the chef the Key and Peele sketch. Well, how did you like my food? Well, did I like it? It was the best in the whole world, just not any world I'd like to live in. All
Yeah,
right.
yeah,
I'm excited. What's the author? You sent it to me, but
yeah,
what's the...
yeah. We'll do Pinter next week. That's where did the books go? Yeah, so we'll just do the Caretaker and what was the other one? The Caretaker and the Birthday Party.
Well,
Um, from
I'm very excited.
uh,
And I'll
it's
choose what I want. I'm
it's delicious.
Oh, good. I'm gonna go for like total fucking personal confessionalism after Pynchon because this is Pynchon was so removed. I'm ready for something like you know
Yeah,
something super not removed from experience,
and
like
Pinter
bell jar shit.
Pinter is Webern. You know,
Oh, great.
yeah, he just has that wonderfully precise, out of key precisionism. Whatever the price, just it's so menacing, um, and evasive in the best sense possible. So,
Lovely, lovely, lovely. Okay.
all right,
I'll see ya.
I'll see you, Chris. Bye.
Bye.